Hey folks, Jamie Stokes from Royal LePage Frank here. I want to talk about rentals today, why rental costs are so high. So I know tenants are pretty upset about the cost of rents, and I don't blame them, but I want to explain a little bit of why rental prices are so high. So when you're the landlord and you're buying the house, if you're buying $1 million house, for example, you've got a huge down payment to put down. Say you put down 20% of $1 million home, that's $200,000. That's quite a bit of money. On top of this, the monthly mortgage cost, you're going to be paying at least $4,000 a month for your mortgage. Probably closer to five. I'm not a mortgage agent, so I'm not going to specify numbers here, but we'll just use that as an example. So they put down their deposit. They bought this place with the intent of renting it out, and I want tenants and everybody to understand that the landlord is doing this basically as like a retirement plan. So that's their investment. It's no different than investing in cryptocurrency, stocks, bonds, any other type of investment. Real estate is usually a pretty good investment because over time it only appreciates in value. There are a lot of risks involved in being a landlord. I'm not going to touch on them too much, but I'll just say, damage, or if tenants are unable or decide not to continue paying rent, that's on the landlord to make up for those costs. They're going to have another primary residence that they live in, so they're going to have to pay their mortgage on their primary residence as well as on their rental properties. They've got property insurance, upgrades, repairs. If the appliances break down, anything like that, roofing, windows, property taxes. There's a lot to take into consideration that landlords have to pay. But the reason that rents are so high is because of the housing market. It's not because your landlord is out to take advantage of you or gouge you and take you for all you're worth. It's simply because house prices are as high as they are. And, our prices on everything is going up: utilities, food, vehicles, everything. So you need to understand that these things are somewhat related. Just in general, the cost of living is going up. So if they're buying a rental property as an investment, rather than other forms of investing, I think it's a pretty solid investment. And you need to understand that their costs are very expensive, and they need to have money aside in order to maintain the place for themselves, for property taxes, and for other things as well, like I mentioned, repairs, for example. If the mortgage on the rental property costs the landlord, $4,000 a month, for example, tenants are kind of upset right now. They're saying that, the rents are outrageous, and you know what? They kind of are outrageous, but so is the cost of buying a house. So every business um, is in it to make money. The landlords, I kind of consider them like a mom and pop shop. Their income that they make from having rental properties isn't always as extravagant as people think. Sometimes the market value for a rental property doesn't work out in the landlord's favor. This is, when they might decide to sell their property. But if the mortgage is, $4,000 a month, for example, tenants kind of believe that an entire house should be listed for like 1,500 or 2,000 bucks a month. But tenants and people in general need to understand that that's not how things work. As I said, it's an investment for them, and there's no point in them doing it if it's just going to cost them money. So, 4,000 bucks a month for their mortgage, and then the tenants believe that the cost for rent should be 1,500 or 2,000 a month, for example, something like that. You can't fairly expect that the landlord is willing to, or even necessarily capable of, paying the rest of the mortgage for that. Like, in order for it to make sense for a landlord to have a rental property, they have to put down a lot of money. They have to be available for their tenants, um, repairs, things like that, of course. But it doesn't make financial sense for anybody to have an investment property if they're just losing money on it. Like, nobody's gonna throw away money. So if the rent on the place, let's say the mortgage is $4,000 a month, the rent on the place, they try and rent the entire house out for, say, $3,500, unless they split the upper and the lower levels. They might rent them out separately. That's very common. Um, the house prices are just so high that landlords don't have a choice but to make rents high as well. You can't have, you can't have an investment that's losing you money, because then it becomes not an investment. There's no point in doing it if there's no money to be made. But tenants and tenants kind of need to understand it's not fair to expect somebody to be able to pay for the mortgage for a house and you're only paying a fraction of that. I mean, I wish that was the case. And I don't want to blame tenants or anything like that, or put tenants down. Everybody has rented at one point or another, for the most part. People don't just move out of mom and dad's place and end up buying their first house right away. Um, that's not typically the case, anyways. But the price difference there is from the landlord paying the mortgage and the tenants living there, and what they believe is fair rent. It's all in relation. The cost of the mortgage and the cost of the rent is just, it's not worth it. We had a couple of years ago during COVID, we had where tenants were almost celebrating because the government stepped in, and I don't think the government had any place to do so, saying that if people aren't making enough money, or if they can't afford rent, they don't have to pay it. That I think that's overstepping, and the government had no place to say that in the first place. I know tenants were pretty happy about that, because a lot of them were struggling, and I get it. I feel for you, definitely. More people are struggling now than aren't, I think. There's statistics on that about how people are struggling here in Canada. But everything has to work out. It has to be, I mean, we have to be reasonable. And as a landlord, you need to understand your tenants. And as the tenants, you need to understand the landlord. It doesn't make financial sense for somebody to invest in something if it's just going to lose them money. They can only carry that for so long before they're out of money. So during COVID, there was CERB payments. There was, some people were working, a lot of people weren't. Depends on your type of employment, what you did for a living. But some people were still making the same amount of money and just decided, excuse me, basically that they didn't want to continue paying rent. Even if their income, wherever they got it from, was the same. It was like, we're in a position now where we don't have to pay rent, and there seems to be a resentment towards landlords. I'm not a landlord, so I'm making this video as a tenant currently, because of my situation. A few years ago, I had to move, and my current place now, it's not extravagant, but it works for me, and I wanted to keep my kids in the same school district without changing anything like that. So I rented a place in this area here, and my landlord's fantastic. We get along great. He doesn't bother me. We respect each other. He respects my privacy, and I respect his. If he does come here, it's like maybe once a year or whatever, and he always asks me what kind of food he can bring me. So he's Chinese, and he asks me what Chinese food I want, and I love when he does that. We're on mutual respect. I take care of his house. He's very comfortable. I update him whenever they have questions or whatever on the property. If there's any issues, I don't bother him. I've had the stove have issues, and I have had the dishwasher have issues, and I replace those myself out of my own pocket. Um, I replace the flooring throughout the main floor and stuff like that as well. And I never asked the landlord for anything. I never bothered him. I do take care of my current places if it's my own. That's typically not standard. If there's issues with the appliances and stuff, the tenant will reach out to the landlord, because in the contracts it's typical that the landlord will maintain and have appliances in good working order, which I can understand, but that's another expense for the landlord. So basically, when it comes down to the cost of a house, what the landlord is paying for a mortgage, property taxes, maintenance, say the furnace or AC goes, windows, roof, any damage. They also need to they need to save money for that, but they also need to keep into consideration the other risks involved. If there's an issue with a tenant, and the tenant is unable to afford to pay rent, life happens. There's circumstances where we have financial obligations sometimes that maybe we can't meet. I don't hold any judgment on that. Your landlord may give you extra time. They can evict you, but I always recommend being fair to each other, respectful and understanding. If you have a good landlord and you have a good tenant, it's worth it to just keep things going how they are. Yeah, you might be able to get more rent or whatever after a bit, but if your tenant's good, your landlord's going to want to keep you because they know that rent is reliable and there's a lot less risk to them, right? Getting somebody in there that's new, they're kind of unsure. So I just think everybody needs to kind of have an open mind here and understand that the reason that rents are so high, and I just posted an article on my Facebook page about it, how the housing market is cooling, but rents are so high. Um, Everybody is kind of struggling. So I remember in one of the rental groups, people were saying, we don't have to pay rent now. But I got eaten alive in there because I said, if I questioned what happens if you don't pay rent. And they're just like, well, the landlord can pay that. Well, I think a lot of people think that the landlords are a lot better off financially than what they actually are. Um, Landlords typically don't have gobs and gobs of money. They have a job typically. They work. They're hardworking people. They have the mortgage on their primary residence, and they bought this place as an investment. Like I said, no different than any other type of investment. But it's not worth it to them if they're not making ends meet and they're just losing money every month. Um, have an open mind, and I've tried to explain this to people before, and they absolutely refuse. Like, they just don't care to listen. In their minds, the landlord is just taking advantage of them, and they don't want to hear or understand and listen to why things are the way that they are. It's not the tenant's fault. It's not the landlord's fault. It's the housing market's fault. That's if tenants could afford to actually buy, they probably would, but they're not in that position a lot of the time, and that's fine. Like I said, everybody works different jobs, has different financial obligations, and life just doesn't always work out that way. So understand the reason that your landlord is in it. It's not to take advantage of you. It's just they want to have a secure future, just the same as everybody else does. So their investment, they're paying their mortgage on it, and they are counting on your rent coming in. I had issues in the rental group because I questioned, what happens if you don't pay your rent there? Well, if the landlord can't continue paying it, it's an added stressor on them, and maybe you don't care, maybe you do, but if the landlord can't pay it, the bank doesn't care. The bank is just going to basically repossess the house, and it's going to go up for sale. So if you don't pay your rent, you're not going to have a place to live either, because the bank doesn't care. They're a business, and they're not on a personal level and invested in it personally like your landlord is. So my suggestion to everybody is to is to listen to each other, be open, be fair and honest, and you can have absolutely great relationships between landlords and tenants. And I always focus on this because there's no reason why landlords and tenants can't really get along. The landlord has something that the tenant needs, and the landlord or the tenant is kind of tapped out as to what they can afford on rent a lot of the time. Our statistics for rent, you're supposed to pay a certain percentage of our income towards rent. Well, I can tell you, I know for a fact that most people are struggling, like definitely most people, but it's not easy for anybody. Make sure that you pay your rent on time because eventually it will catch up to you. You will get evicted. But I feel for both parties here because there's no easy solution. It's the housing market. I don't blame landlords. I don't blame tenants. It's just a difficult situation for everybody, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that it's not just people making money and taking advantage of others or anything like that. It's the housing market. You can't expect the mortgage to be $4,000 a month and to only pay 1,500 or 2,000 or 2,500 bucks a month. Nobody is going to eat the cost difference for a stranger. But get along. You'll have a great relationship together. Talk about things, work things out. If there's issues, address them civilly and cooperate, and you'll have a great place to live. Take care for now.